What if Pokemon with stone evolutions evolved with different stones? This is a pretty interesting and fascinating concept in my opinion, and it's what we're going to be exploring in this video. To demonstrate this idea a little more in depth, let's just go ahead and get started with our first Pokemon, Pikachu. Pikachu normally evolves into Raichu with the use of a Thunderstone, but what if it gained the ability to evolve with, say, a Firestone as well? In that case, you could end up with an evolution like Rekachu, an electric fire-type evolution for Pikachu that is brought about thanks to the properties of a Firestone. There are currently very few Pokemon that can evolve with the use of multiple different stones, and honestly, it feels like the kind of thing that could be very interesting to explore in a future game on a larger scale. It could act as a way to give older Pokemon new evolutions in a new generation, but instead of just being a group of random Pokemon that they give evolutions to, they could all be stone evolutions, and they've suddenly gained the ability in this region to evolve with different stones, and it would be up to you and potentially the professor of the game to figure out why this happens. In the case of Rekachu, I think it could be a good candidate for this sort of thing because it could be a sort of pseudo tip of the cap to Gorochu, Pikachu's long-lost third stage evolution from Gen 1. Additionally, it would also be a way of doing something new with Pikachu, which is always going to be big news whenever it happens, without actually altering Pikachu's design itself, since I'm sure the Pokemon Company want to leave Pikachu be as their mascot. As a part of the Pikachu line, Rekachu also follows the naming conventions of this family of Pokemon, as its name primarily comes from Reka, a Japanese term meaning raging fire. I would honestly love to see this sort of thing happen as a way to do something different and creative with old Pokemon, but in addition to evolving a Pokemon with a different evolutionary stone, you could also evolve them with opposite evolutionary stones too. Take Nidorino for example. It evolves into Nidoking with the use of a Moonstone, but there is also a Sunstone that kind of acts as an opposite to the Moonstone. So what if Nidorino got the chance to evolve with a Sunstone? Well, it might result in something like Nidotor, who I am referring to as the Tyrant Pokemon. Since a new stone evolution wouldn't exactly be very exciting if it just kept the same type of its pre-evolution or of its evolutionary counterpart, I opted to give Nidotor a new type, and in this case, that type is also the fire type, making it a poison fire type Pokemon. This initially came from the Sunstone used to evolve it, since that naturally makes for a good fit, but the concept kinda took on a life of its own from there. Since Nidorino's normal evolution, Nidoking, and along with its counterpart Nidoqueen, both kind of have a distinctive king and queen element to their design, it felt like this is something that would need to be followed in any kind of new evolution that was introduced to this line. And that is when I came up with the idea of this Pokemon being themed around a dictator. I thought that this would keep the same kind of vibes as the other two, while also allowing for a distinct contrast that could help this Pokemon to stand out. And it also just so happens that this concept works great with the poison fire typing I had already given the Pokemon, as it's very emblematic of the rage, power, and overall sinister nature of a dictator. This is also where the name Nidotor comes from as well, which admittedly was the trickiest part of this design to solidify. As some of the few Kanto Pokemon who have not yet gained a new form or variant, I feel like something like this would be a great way to do the Nidos justice in this department. But speaking of Kanto Pokemon, we have already covered a couple here, so I'd like to go ahead and switch things up and talk about Togepi. Togepi evolves into Togetic, and then from Togetic into Togekiss with the use of a Shiny Stone. Between the Shiny Stone and the fact that Togekiss is known for its happiness and positive nature, I thought this would be another good candidate to give a opposite evolution to. So with that in mind, what if instead of a Shiny Stone, you used a Dusk Stone on Togetic to evolve it instead? Well, that would result in Togalorn, the melancholy Pokemon. Togalorn is a fairy ghost type, and as opposed to the happiness of Togekiss, Togalorn embodies feelings of sadness and lament. It's often mentioned that the Togepi family only show up in places that are free from conflict and strife, and this sadly makes them hard to find in the modern day. An evolution like Togalorn could be a somber continuation of that storyline where, in order to survive as a species, Togepi and Togetic had to adapt to the new world that they have found themselves in despite their preference for happiness, and that is a world that is much more filled with despair and strife. This is what could result in Togalorn, an evolution of Togetic that has essentially been forced to acknowledge the sadness of the world. In this evolution, it is now equipped to deal with this kind of emotion and energy, therefore meaning that it can survive and continue to live on, but that doesn't mean that it's happy about it. Its new ghost typing represents this kind of lament for the world that it finds itself in, and that is also where its name originates as well, as Togalorn comes from the word forlorn, which is defined as pitifully sad and abandoned or lonely. For Pokemon who revolve so centrally around emotions like this, I feel like Togalorn would be a great and fascinating addition to this family, even if it is a bit on the somber side. Continuing on with this theme of opposite evolutions, since we just did a Sunstone evolution for a Moonstone Pokemon, I thought it could also be interesting to do the opposite and have a Pokemon that evolves with a Sunstone evolve with a Moonstone. The Pokemon I chose for this ended up being Heliolisk, because not only does it evolve with a Sunstone, but its whole design is sun-themed, so it felt like a Moonstone evolution for Helioptile could be a lot of fun. This is Reptiluna, and it is what you get when you give Helioptile a Moonstone. Shout out to my guy Rgreywind, by the way, who drew all of the artwork for these evolutions, and as always, you can check him out with the links in the description. As I mentioned before, since Heliolisk is also very sun-themed itself, it only made sense that this evolution would be very moon-themed, and overall, I feel like this is a fun concept. Not only did this influence its design naturally, but it also influenced its name, as you might be able to tell, and it even influenced its typing, as I decided to give Reptiluna the electric water type to coincide with the moon vibes. This is also sort of a bit of a commentary on Heliolisk as well, because it could have been part fire type with all of the sun theming, but instead it's part normal for whatever reason. So this is also kind of based on a more ideal scenario where Heliolisk is part fire type, Reptiluna is part water, and Helioptile as the first stage is part normal, and its secondary type would be changed based on what stone and evolution you decided to go with. That could be a pretty cool thing to do with these Pokemon, and even though I do still like Heliolisk a lot, I definitely think it would help to make it a little more exciting. When it comes to stone evolutions, it seems like you can't exactly get away from Kanto for too long, because I now want to go ahead and look at Growlithe. Growlithe is such a great Pokemon already, and making a counterpart to Arcanine seemed like way too good of an opportunity to pass up, so I had to go ahead and include it, and what really intrigued me about doing this was the Ice Stone. I thought making an Ice Stone evolution for Growlithe, even though it's a fire type, sounded like a ton of fun. So that is what I did, and it ended up resulting in Arctobark. Since it began as a fire type, I felt like I couldn't really take that away in its entirety, which is why Arctobark is a fire ice type, which is not only cool in and of itself, but in my opinion, it's also a way that makes sense for a Pokemon to get this kind of very opposite type combination, which is pretty cool too. It also keeps the same general vibes as Arcanine, as you can see, but the idea is that it becomes a little more husky-like to reflect that ice typing a bit more, and then the name Arctobark is also meant to do that too, coming from Arctic and bark. Overall, I think it's a pretty cool design, and I think this concept in general is super fascinating too. But now I want to know what you guys think, so be sure to let me know in the comments below, and leave a like and subscribe if you enjoyed. I'll see you soon with another new video. Thanks so much for watching this one, I really appreciate it, and until the next one, as always, I will smell you guys later.